Before we begin, a few points of housekeeping. Contrary to my statement in the previous video, my essay on the Targaryen line of succession has been delayed. It turns out it's a much deeper topic, and in order to give it its proper due, more time will be taken in research and development. In lieu of that, I have moved forward the video on Kingsguard Beyond-the-Wall, a common enough fan theory which I intend to tackle. For those who've seen my previous video, certain material from that video has been included in this one, slimmed down to provide appropriate context. In the writings of George R.R. Martin, few events spawn as much rampant speculation as the Tower of Joy. There exists potential, and thus theory crafting, that one or more of the three Kingsguard tasked to guard Lyanna, Sir Arthur Dane, Sir Gerald Hightower, or Sir Oswell Went, survived the confrontation with Eddard Stark and went into exile with a new identity, as absurd as it sounds. For those who are new to A Song of Ice and Fire, prior to the events of the first novel, there was a rebellion which saw the overthrow of the previous ruling dynasty of the Seven Kingdoms. This rebellion was triggered by the combination of the insane tyranny of King Aerys II, thereafter known as the Mad King, and the kidnapping of a noblewoman, Lyanna Stark, by the Crown Prince Rhaegar. Lyanna's betrothed, Lord Robert Baratheon, and his friends and allies rose up in opposition to this abuse of power, perceived or otherwise, in a war known as Robert's Rebellion. After the defeat of Rhaegar and the death of Aerys, Robert, through his father's maternal heritage, claimed the throne over the corpses of Rhaegar's wife and children, and vowed to exterminate the previous dynasty down to its last member. Lyanna's brother, Eddard, who was Robert's closest friend, and now Lord Stark, after the murder of their father and brother by Aerys, objected to the slaughter of children, leaving Robert to his throne, and took the army to fight the last battles of the war, and locate Lyanna, whom Rhaegar had hid away. In a band of 7 champions, the sacred number of most of the Seven Kingdoms, Eddard located the Tower of Joy, named so by Rhaegar as Lyanna's prison. Guarding that prison were 3 of Aerys' Kingsguard, the king's bodyguards and enforcers, and the most deadly warriors in the land. Only Eddard and his friend Howland Reed survived the confrontation, and somehow the pair managed to tear down the Tower of Joy, using the stones to make 8 cairns, stone burial mounds, for the fallen. Eddard met with the dying Lyanna to hear her dying bequests. He returned the family sword of one of the Kingsguard to the Lady Ashara Dane, the sister. Ashara was rumoured to be Eddard's lover. This was before returning Lyanna's body, as well as an infant who had grown up to be Jon Snow, first to Robert, and then to the Stark family home at Winterfell for burial. Lyanna's body, not the infant. Now, the in-text explanation leaves many details unanswered. In previous videos, I have speculated on some of these gaps, such as how Sir Gerald Hightower and Lord Eddard Stark found the secret location, and questioned certain assumptions like Jon Snow's claim to the throne and Lyanna's cause and time of death. In the matter of the Kingsguard, it appears rather straightforward. 10 people fought, 8 were buried, 2 rode away, case closed. There is, however, enough inconsistencies to call into question the reliability of the narrator Eddard Stark. Such as, how did 2 men pull down a tower by themselves? And since there was a they finding Eddard with Lyanna when she died, who else was there besides Eddard and Howland? One of the more prevalent explanations for the continued survival of one or more of the Kingsguard is exile, to the wall or beyond it. In order for Sir Arthur, Sir Gerald or Sir Oswell to still be alive, it must be plausible that Eddard and Howland could and would let them live and seek exile. Whichever knight lived would need a new identity which matches the timeline of what occurs after the rebellion, be of an appropriate age, physical appearance and personality, matching existing descriptions of the 3. As to the first, it is explained in Bran 3, A Clash of Kings, that Howland Reed saved Eddard Stark, who was fighting Sir Arthur Dane. This runs counter to the rumour that Eddard won in single combat with the realm's finest swordsman. Now, Game of Thrones, Season 6, shows us that Howland Reed snuck up behind Sir Arthur and stuck a dagger through the back of his neck. However, the TV show leaves much to be desired as an adaptation, especially as a faithful recreation of the books. Other explanations include Howland warging Sir Arthur as a distraction. For those who don't know, warging is a sort of telepathy and mind control, where a human, typically with magical powers, is able to control and interface their mind with that of an animal they are close with. Doing this with humans is almost unheard of. Eddard's son Brandon is able to walk into his manservant Hodor, Hodor being, shall I say this, developmentally challenged, or better say damaged. Bran, as well as another warg named Varamir Sixskins, attempt to seize control of the mind of a fully functional human being, though this, in both cases, results in failure. This is all to say that Howland warging Sir Arthur is within the realms of possibility in Martin's fantasy world. However, this as an ability is exceedingly rare, and even experienced wargs have not been able to pull this off. And if Sir Arthur was killed during the process, the feedback would have been very traumatizing for Howland. There exists a more reasonable explanation, in that Howland was the one that taught his daughter Mira, who appears in Bran's chapters of A Clash of Kings and afterwards, how to trap animals in a net. And whilst tangled up in a net, Eddard could have struck the killing blow, or stunned Sir Arthur. Like Sir Bouston at the Trident or Sir Jaime at Whispering Wood, it is possible for a combatant to be incapacitated and captured. Not all combat must be to the death. And if it was indeed Eddard who was defeated, and Howland saved his life with words and reasoning instead of daggers and nets, he might have had no choice. His 5 dead companions were 5 eliminated witnesses, 5 tongues not to wag. After all, even if the 3 Kingsguard won, how would they fulfill their duty to their king? They are alone, surrounded by enemies, having lost the war. Like Titus Blackwood in A Dance with Dragons, after the War of the 5 Kings, it is important to surrender to the right person. Now, as to why Eddard wouldn't simply kill Sir Arthur and friends, a few reasons come to mind. If his beloved sister Lyanna asked him not to. If his potential lover Ashara asked him not to, especially in helping Eddard to find the tower in the first place, as it was most plausible that Ashara was the one who helped Sir Gerald and later Eddard find the Tower of Joy, Ashara being Sir Arthur's sister, and both of these Dornish individuals and the towers located in Dorne, they were the most likely ones to find the tower in the first place and render it over for Rhaegar's use. And it is in Eddard's character, or rather to say it is not entirely against Eddard's character, to offer exile rather than execution, as in the case with Cersei and her children after he discovered the incest and adultery. Not typical, but plausible.
For a start, I do not kill children. You would do well to listen, my lady. I shall say this only once. When the king returns from his hunt, I intend to lay the truth before him. You must be gone by then, you and your children, all three, and not to Ghastly Rock. If I were you, I should take ship for the free cities, or even farther, to the Summer Isles, or the port of Aben, as far as the winds blow. Exile, a bitter cup to drink from. A sweeter cup than your father served Rhaegar's children, and kinder than you deserve. Your father and your brothers would do well to go with you. Lord Tywin's gold will bear you comfort and hire swords to keep you safe. You shall need them, I promise you. No matter where you flee, Robert's wrath will follow you, to the back of Beyond if need be. Eddard 12, A Game of Thrones. In the paragraph above this, Cersei brings up Eddard's adventure in Dorne, wondering how he came by Jon Snow. I shall wear that as a badge of honour, Ned said dryly. Honour, she spat. How dare you play the noble lord with me? What do you take me for? You've a bastard of your own, I've seen him. Who was the mother, I wonder? Some Dornish peasant you raped whilst her holdfast burned? A whore? Or worse, the grieving sister, the Lady Ashara? She threw herself into the sea, I'm told. Why was that? For the brother you slew, or the child you stole? Tell me, my honourable Lord Eddard, how are you any different from Robert, or me, or Jaime? Eddard 12, A Game of Thrones.
Now, all three Kingsguard have noble families who might be willing to shelter them, but doing so would put these families at risk of Robert's wrath, and expose them to their own enemies. House Connington and House Went had their holdings severely reduced after the rebellion, for instance, and whilst Robert might be persuaded to grant leniency to Sir Barristan as a paragon of virtue, also Jaime because of money, this famous forgiveness is not likely to extend to the three, really two, knights who aided and abetted Lyanna's kidnapping and eventual demise. And like Sir Barristan, any surviving Kingsguard would have had the sense and grace not to put their families in mortal danger. As to the matter of the Kingsguard vows, and how to get out of them, when a knight, or the hound, kneels before the king, or queen on occasion, offers up their sword and accepts the white cloak, they forsake lands and set aside wives and children, and also swear a number of vows, hence acquire a number of duties. The first and most obvious, defend the king from harm and threat, and to give their blood for his and their lives as needed. Second, obey the king's commands. Third, keep their secrets. Fourth, provide counsel when asked, and remain silent when not. Fifth, serve the king's pleasure. Like the Night's Watch, the Kingsguard have a vow against taking wives and fathering children. This is to prevent divided loyalties. It is not a vow of celibacy, though it may sound like that to a simple mind. Sixth, defend the king's name and honour. Seventh, if required, provide protection to the other members of the king's family, and do no harm to the blood royal. These vows are usually for life, though there are exceptions, which I'll discuss later. The reason I bring this up is throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, as well as Fire and Blood, it is very strongly implied that vows have more power in them than just societal expectation and honour. There is a magic to certain vows in Martin's world. This is shown explicitly in the Night's Watch vow, which allows them to access the Black Door under the Night Fort. In the case of the Kingsguard vow, for a treasonous or insubordinate vassal, putting their own man in the Kingsguard risks them becoming an unreliable agent, as Peter Baelish tells Sansa in A Storm of Swords. So one of the Kettleblacks put the poison in Joff's cup. Sir Osmond had been near the king all night, she remembered. Did I say that? Lord Peter cut the blood orange in two with his dagger, and offered half to Sansa. The lads are far too treacherous to be part of any such scheme, and Osmond has become especially unreliable since he joined the Kingsguard. That white cloak does things to a man, I find. Even a man like him. Sansa 6, A Storm of Swords. Sir Arthur Dane and Sir Oswell Went had greater latitude when assigned to Prince Rhaegar, obeyed his orders, kept his secrets. But when Sir Gerald the Lord Commander arrived, bearing the King's commands, I suspect they were compelled to obey, even over Rhaegar's wishes, or their own. It may be that Sir Gerald held Lyanna captive to compel Rhaegar back into Aerys' service, since whilst the Kingsguard could not harm the King's blood, except under the direct orders or for the explicit defence of said king, the prince's mistress was another matter. And those orders persisted after news of Aerys and Rhaegar's deaths, thus the fight with Eddard's not-so-magnificent seven. If the Queen commanded me to protect his star, I would have had no choice but to obey. But Daenerys Targaryen had never established a proper Queensguard, even for herself, nor issued any commands in respect to her consort. The world was simpler when I had a Lord Commander to decide such matters, Selmy reflected. Now I am the Lord Commander, and it is hard to know which path is right. The Queensguard, A Dance with Dragons. It may be that following the death of Aerys, the secrets of controlling the Kingsguard were lost, and thus the new dynasty could not compel their White Knights into great deeds, but who knows? In any case, if you have taken the vow, how do you get out? Given the nature of the Brotherhood, the only acceptable way to leave is feet first. One of King Joffrey's first acts was to dismiss Sir Barristan from the Kingsguard. This didn't free Barry from his obligation. He'd been a sworn brother most of his life. He was institutionalized. He needed someone to serve. There is one sure way to leave the Kingsguard with your life. Join the Night's Watch. In lieu of death, a sentence can be commuted to life on the wall. 4 of the Kingsguard who served Maegor took the black after his death. During the reign of Jaehaerys the Conciliator, Sir Lucamore Strong broke his vows and fathered 16 children on 3 wives, and was sent to the wall after being gilded by his sworn brothers. In a legal sense, the Night's Watch vows would cancel out the vows of the Kingsguard, and if there is a magical element to the vows of the White Cloak, the vows of the Black might render them moot. And given the wall's capacity to disrupt some magical abilities, living beyond the wall, and hence beyond the law of the Seven Kingdoms, may be a second chance for someone otherwise bound up in oaths and reputation. Whilst difficult, a Kingsguard survivor could ship out with a smuggler, getting dropped off at the wall or beyond it. Davos did business with the Night's Watch, for instance. Now if they can take a ship, why not go to Dragonstone? Join Viserys and Rhaella? At this point, Dragonstone is still under Targaryen control. Well, even Barristan, who was loyal to Aerys, if grudgingly, had no respect for Viserys, who was his father's son. Daenerys was an unknown quantity, not born yet. Sir Arthur and Sir Oswell were not Aerys' men, and Sir Gerald was probably working for the downfall of the Targaryen dynasty. And who said anything about travelling up the narrow sea in the first place? Westeros has 2 coasts, and the Sunset Sea coast of Westeros, which is on the western side, has traffic just as the narrow sea does. And, as shown with Jorah's attempt to sell captured poachers into slavery, smugglers and the like do make up as far as Bear Island at least, which is close enough to get to the wall, and the Shadow Tower, which will be relevant later. Now, having established opportunity, means, and motive, who did the Kingsguard become? If you have been following this theory for a while, there have been 3 commonly cited characters in the North that could be Sir Arthur Dane, Sir Gerald Hightower, and Sir Oswell Went. These are, respectively, Mance Rayder, Tormund Giantsbane, and Corran Halfhand. We'll start with the Sir Arthur Dane equals Mance Rayder corollary. Of the three, there is the most tentative evidence supporting this speculation.
I wish you good fortune
in the wars to come.
in the wars to come.
Mance Rayder is, at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire, the king beyond the wall, the unofficial ruler of the wildlings, an ancient population of humans who were separated from the rest of Westeros after the wall was built or grown. He was supposedly born in a tryst between a ranger of the Night's Watch and a wildling woman, a disapproved of practice, but not unheard of. Upon reaching his majority, he joined the Night's Watch, 10 or so years before the events of the novel. Estimating this from his admission, he was a young crow, the wildling slang for a brother of the Night's Watch, who dress in black. During a visit to Winterfell, wherein he met a younger Robert and John, who were young enough to get away with pranking guards. Some unknown time after this, Mance went on a ranging north of the wall, whence he was injured by wildlife, and his companions took him to a local healer's daughter, the healer had died, who mended his wounds and stitched up his damaged cloak with red fabric, a personal treasure to the woman. After his recovery, the party returned to the wall, wherein he was required to destroy his new cloak, as it was not all black. Dismayed by this narrow-mindedness, Mance deserted, joined the wildlings, and proceeded to take what he had learnt from his time in the Night's Watch and use it to organise the wildlings into a cohesive force to break into the Seven Kingdoms. He was wildling born, taken as a child when some raiders were put to the sword. When he left the Shadow Tower, he was only going home again. John 7, A Clash of Kings. Now, why do I think Mance Rayder could be a viable candidate for Sir Arthur Dane? Let's start with the name. Rayder, with a Y, stood out to me when I first read A Song of Ice and Fire. A homophone of raider, that being a common occupation for wildlings, who live north of the wall, periodically coming south to raid. Rayder could almost be a bastard name for one born north of the wall, like snow or sand. Except there is that Y. A Y substitute happens often enough in Martin's work. Pike and Blackfire, Birch, Chitterlings, Conklin, Windhall, Harding, Ironwood, to name a few. His first name, Mance, also sounds like the word manse, which is a house in which Tyrion keeps Shay in A Clash of Kings, which is derived from the Latin mansus, dwelling, from further the singular manere, to remain. So in short, Mance Rayder kind of means house raider, comes across as a play on words. On its own, nothing special, but if you've been following my channel, you know that I'm on the lookout for anagrams, or partial anagrams of names. Mance himself uses the name Abel, an anagram of Baal. A storied king beyond the wall, as an alias. One of Oberyn's sand snakes, Sorella, uses their name backwards, Aloras, as an alias. I've suggested, with a little tomfoolery, Oberyn could be rearranged into Qyburn, and Jack and Hagar turns into Rhaegar John. And as a bonus, Sansa, in the Vale, is given the alias Elaine by Littlefinger, which when rearranged, looks awfully close to Lyanna, her aunt. Mance Rayder and Arthur Dane have the same number of letters. When rearranged, creates the following: ARR R Dane, with MEC left over. Not quite there, but if you rotate the C, you get a U. Then you take the M and split it here, and get roughly an R and an N. Then you break up the letter E, adding spurs to the top of the R and the N, and then you have Arthur Dane. Now, let's consider appearance. Mance Rayder has brown eyes, brown hair gone mostly to grey, slender and of middling height. Sir Arthur's appearance is unknown, and this is a theme I'll spare you. We are given next to no description, direct information about the three Kingsguard's appearance from Eddard's chapters. Of Sir Arthur, it is only from Jaime's fight with Brienne of Tarth that we learn Sir Arthur and Sir Gerald are two members of a very short list of warriors who were physically stronger than Jaime. The Lannisters are tall, usually, and nearly every other listed warrior is larger and taller. This might imply that Sir Arthur and Sir Gerald were also tall, big men. Indeed, the stony Dornish, of whose stock are the Danes, being more of first-men descent, who dwell in the mountains, are typically larger than their salty Dornish rivals, which would seem to eliminate the Manse of middling height as a candidate. After all, it was also through Jon's point of view, and hence comparison, that we learn that the Lannisters are tall, except you know who. However, Jaime was a boy of 15 when he served alongside Sir Arthur and Sir Gerald, hence not yet at his maximum height and strength. Mayhaps Jaime retains a fair sense of comparison, not distorted by time, but he was a boy, thus this is unreliable. While we don't know what Sir Arthur looked like, we do have the three members of House Dane to interpolate likely coloration from. First is Sir Gerald Darkstar Dane, whose dark purple eyes and silver hair divided by a streak of midnight black seems to have inspired much of Sir Arthur Dane, Sword of the Morning's fan art. Darkstar also describes Sir Arthur as a cousin. Sir Gerald Dane, Darkstar, so not to be as confused with Sir Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, is from a cadet branch of House Dane. Cadet branch refers to a splitting of the family tree many generations back. Typically the eldest brother inherits the primary family domain, in this case Starfall, and the young brother, the cadet, inherits a lesser property, in this case High Hermitage. I use the male terms here since the Danes are an ancient family in Dorne, long preceding the Rornish conquest and their equal inheritance laws, and we don't know when the High Hermitage branch was established. I bring all this up to describe that Darkstar's Valyrian features are not a reliable indication of Sir Arthur's appearance. The two branches possibly isolated from one another by many generations, though perhaps not as many as you might think. This is due to what I speculate as periodic inbreeding by House Dane, using High Hermitage as storage for pure Dane stock, whereas Starfall needs outmarry for political reasons, hence diluting genes. They reinfuse the Valyrian features by marrying their High Hermitage cousins. The silver hair and purple eyes, which are likely tied to or indicative of some special genetic traits, attributive markers as it were. This brings us to the two members of the Starfall branch we do have descriptions of: his nephew, Lord Edric Dane, Beric Squire, and his sister, Lady Ashara, both of which happen to have purple eyes as well. Edric has what could be silver hair, though. His description is relayed through Arya, who grew up in a post-Targaryen Seven Kingdoms, mostly in the north. Her experience in King's Landing wouldn't have likely presented many individuals of Valyrian descent, as Robert hated Targaryens, and any person with silver hair and purple eyes would want to stay far away if they didn't want to trigger a Surge the Magic Seal Pup flashback. Thus I present that Arya's description of Edric is essentially Valyrian in appearance. Arthur's sister, Ashara, has dark hair, possibly brown, with violet eyes. We do not know any details of Edric's parents, save his father was Sir Arthur's elder brother. If his mother was of High Hermitage Dane, this might be where he got his pale hair. Ashara's dark hair is likely Sir Arthur's as well, So Mance's hair doesn't disprove the theory. The eyes are somewhat more dubious. Mance's are brown. However, in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, we see in the personage of Prince Baelor Breakspear Targaryen, it is possible for one sibling to have brown eyes, where another, in this case Prince Maekar the Anvil Targaryen, has purple. Additionally, Maekar's own children, Aeron, as well as his son Aegon, have silver hair and purple eyes. However, one of his sons, Daeron, has brown hair. This is especially relevant because their mother was a Dane. Maekar had married Diana Dane, so it is possible that though the family is heavy in silver hair, that one of the children can be born with brown. If the Dane siblings' parents were an example of outbreeding for politics, they could have had mixed features, inheriting the dark hair, which House Dane sought to correct in the following generations, with Edric's blonde or silver. I'm going to go off on a tangent here. In the case of House Targaryen, effort is expended to maintain the ability to ride dragons by careful reproductive selection, which is why they wed brother to sister when appropriate. But effort is also made to preserve the attributive markers of dragon riding ability, that is, the silver gold hair and purple eyes. These traits on their own have no bearing on a prince or princess's ability to rule or ride dragons. Rhaenyra's children, the first three in any case, could still ride dragons in spite of having brown hair and brown eyes. Baelor Breakspear was set to be a capable ruler, even if he took after his mother in appearance. However, people distrusted these kids for their appearance, and questioned, violently at times, if a relative who looked more like a true Targaryen shouldn't be king. In some ways, pure competence, or even intrinsic qualities like dragon riding genes, are not good enough. In fact, a competent prince who does not have the look, and hence will more successfully propagate off-brand genetics, may be seen as a threat to the dynasty. Should I be correct, and Sir Arthur did not look like a proper Dane, he may have been seen as a threat to the 10,000-year dynasty of House Dane, made worse by his sheer competence, with sword and in leadership. He may have outshone his elder brother, and needed to be removed from the line of succession. Sir Arthur, claiming the family sword Dawn, could have seemed like Daemon Blackfyre being gifted the sword of that very name. In these situations, aside from fratricide and exile, there exist several honourable means of removing an inconvenient son from a family. Jaehaerys I sent his son Vagon to the Citadel to become Archmaester. Waymar Royce, fourth son of Jon Royce, and Samuel Tarly were sent to join the Night's Watch. For those inclined, becoming a Septon is another path. And in the case of Sir Loras Tyrell, the Kingsguard is an honourable way to dispose of a son, where they will not pass on their competing claim to the family's domain. Perhaps Sir Arthur was sent to the Kingsguard, or strongly encouraged, because he didn't look enough like a Dane. A family like that doesn't survive 10,000 years without some serious family planning. Appearance-wise, it is possible Arthur and Mance are the same. Next is the matter of age. According to calculations, Arthur Dane would have been 38 years old, or at least, maybe more, if he survived the current timeline. We do not know how old Mance is, but his mostly grey hair suggests he is too old to be Sir Arthur. However, it isn't uncommon in Martin's Westeros for characters in their 40s or even 30s to have grey hair. Balon Greyjoy, age 40 to 45, has grey and white hair. Eddard, age 35, is beginning to grey. And Barbary Dustin, who is of age with Sir Arthur, has half her hair turned grey. Stannis starts going prematurely grey after the Battle of Blackwater. The grey hair doesn't disprove the theory, as there are enough counterexamples. Some of them, like Stannis and Balon, have clear magical influences, such as Melisandre's magic, and the Sea Stone Chair, which is a suspiciously eldritch artifact. Sir Arthur was exposed to and then separated from Dawn, the Dane family sword, with suspicious properties. And Mance, living the north of the wall, and battling wights and white walkers, isn't devoid of unhealthy magic in his life. Thus he could be younger than he looks. Then there was a matter of mannerisms and bearing. Both Mance and Arthur are skilled with the great sword, Mance having chosen such a weapon to spar with Jon. Both are talented leaders, Mance having united the quarrelsome tribes beyond the wall in a few short years. In the show he had 20 years, in the book considerably less, since he was still a ranger of the Night's Watch when Robb and Jon were children. Arthur's expedition against the Kingsguard Brotherhood was a success, since he was diplomatic with the small folk, who would have otherwise supported the Brotherhood. A talent for command and diplomacy. Now for a more suspicious look at Mance. He is both well-spoken and uses terminology which betrays a noble upbringing. When he recounts to Jon his trip to Winterfell and how he infiltrated Robert's royal progress, he refers to others in the procession as free riders and hedge knights. These are distinct from household and landed knights, a distinction only made by members of the nobility. To a commoner, any armoured man or horse is a knight. Perhaps Mance was an excellent student and listener during his time in the Night's Watch, learning from the knights and nobles, there adapting their mannerisms. But it is a detail, as noted by Roose Bolton, giving Theon notes in the books, or Tywin giving Arya notes in the show.
Girl. My lord. No-born girls say my lord, not my lord. If you're going to pose as a commoner, you should do it properly.
He did not understand, my lord, I said. My lord, when you should have said my lord. Your tongue betrays your birth with every word you say. If you want to sound a proper peasant, say it as if you had mud in your mouth, or you're too stupid to realize it was 2 words, not just 1. Reek 3, A Dance with Dragons. Now Abel, the minstrel, could be accepted to be well-spoken, thus wouldn't arouse Roose's suspicions, but still, Mance's well-spoken and knowledgeable manner is in contrast to his supposed childhood as a stolen wildling. Common-born rangers of the Night's Watch, and even upjunt lords like Janos Slynt, say my lord. Actual noble boys, like Dolorous Ed, Tollett of the Vale, will interchangeably say my lord, possibly half as a joke, and my lord when he feels like it. However, Mance, in his guise as Rattleshirt after the false burning, says the following. The wildling ripped off a bite. I could visit you as easily, my lord. Those guards at your door are a bad jape. Melisandre 1, A Dance with Dragons. It is possible, plausible even, that Mance was a child prodigy, who imprinted upon the Night's Watch brothers of noble birth. Perhaps a lordling, or knight, took the lad under his wing, a project to civilize the barbarian, like Arminius. However, George, dropping Roose's line in week 3, is a hint that someone else, besides Theon, is concealing noble heritage, and Mance's use of my lord in the Melisandre chapter, which immediately precedes week 3. This suggests strongly that Mance is of noble upbringing. I don't think George's placement of these chapters was a coincidence, though perhaps I'm wrong. Sir Arthur was a famous knight, and several people would be able to recognize him if he were to masquerade as a wildling. Firstly, his gate-crashing of Eddard's party for Robert puts him in view of several people who could recognize him. Ned Stark could recognize him, of course, but also Jaime and Cersei spent time around the man. Whilst it didn't happen, Sir Barristan could have easily been there as well as Lord Commander.
and during his time in the Night's Watch, he would have been at risk of exposure by the likes of Sir Jeremy Riker and Sir Alistair Thorne, who served in the Red Keep under Ares. So these are valid points against the theory, mayhaps. That being said, recognition of such a famous knight isn't guaranteed. From Melisandre's POV chapter, she ruminates on trappings of power, objects, behaviours, and settings which a leader must accept if they are to command respect. The branding of a lord, or king, or knight. Her king's trappings are his sword Lightbringer and his flaming crown, amongst other things. The Hound, one of the most easily recognisable warriors in the Seven Kingdoms, demonstrated and explained this to Arya at the Twins, fooling a knight whomst he has defeated at tourney several times. Not wearing his snarling dog helmet, or showing his burned face, he could easily pretend to be a poxy peasant beneath notice of such a proud knight. In A Dance with the Dragons, the Tattered Prince, a mercenary company leader, when he sheds his cloak of many colours, is able to sneak into a hostile marine, past the Unsullied unnoticed. Sir Barristan could fool Sir Jorah by growing a beard, as Jaime attempts himself in A Storm of Swords. Wyman Manderley fakes Sir Davos's death by shoving an onion, Davos's symbol, into the mouth of a dead criminal. Sir Arthur's symbols of power were his sword Dawn and his Kingsguard attire. Mance also has grown a beard. Sir Jeremy Riker and Sir Alistair Thorne may have only ever seen Sir Arthur as a knight of the Kingsguard. They may have never seen the man beneath the white armour and white cloak. Thing is, these men may have never met Mance at all. Mance served at the Shadow Tower. Alistair and Jeremy, as high-profile knights, served at Castle Black. Mance never met Benjen Stark, who, according to George, joined the Night's Watch shortly after the end of Robert's Rebellion, hence served concurrently with Mance. There may actually be very little intermingling between the Shadow Tower and Castle Black. Jorah Mormont knows Mance, Cohen Halfhand knows Mance, but most may not know him by sight. And Sir Arthur was famously killed by Eddard, in an obscure location in Dorne, with precious few witnesses. No one would think to look for a dead man.
Now granted, given that Mance is supposedly taken as a child amongst the Night's Watch, at least according to Cohen Halfhand, it would be phenomenally difficult to fake that, unless Cohen Halfhand was in on it and told John a lie. The story of Mance Rayder, being conceived of a Night's Watch ranger and a wildling woman, was conveyed to us through Queen Selyse Florent, who has only been a few short months at the Wall and likely learned of it entirely through hearsay and gossip. Have I proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Sir Arthur Dayne became Mance Rayder? No. And that is the nature of the beast. Martin, I believe, wrote the character to create the possibility, if he chose in the future, for Arthur Dayne to re-emerge. However, just as likely and just as possible, Mance Rayder is his own character. The many anagrams I have noted could well be just his manner of finding character names, new and interesting ones by taking existing ones and jumbling the letters around to create a new name. These don't necessarily prove the existence of false identities, though they may, in their own way, be how George creates a subconscious link between these different characters in order to tell us something. Now for the next candidate, Tormund Giantsbane, being the alter ego of Sir Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, there is comparatively less evidence. Tormund Giantsbane is, at the time of A Storm of Swords when we meet him, a short man, not particularly tall as you might expect from one of the strongest Kingsguard of Aerys' reign, but he does have a broad chest and a massive belly, which speaks to a man muscled in his youth, gone to fat in old age. His beard, turned white, suggests old age, but we don't know exactly. So Gerald, had he lived to the events of the main series, would be at least 57 years old, which, given what we know, is not necessarily incompatible with Tormund's current age. Like Sir Arthur, we don't know about his appearance, though there are two members of House Hightower, of whom we have descriptions of in the current timeline. The first is Lynesse Hightower, who married Jorah Mormont. She is said to look quite a bit like Daenerys, so we assume by this she means she's pretty, with silver hair and purple eyes. This may seem strange, but it is corroborated by the second member, Alloy Hightower, who is married to Mace Tyrell. Tywin tells us that Mace Tyrell, who is in his 50s, is older than his wife, Alloy, and despite that she has silver hair. It is estimated she is in her late 30s, early 40s, and while as discussed before, this doesn't preclude the possibility of going grey early, to be fully grey at this age is unlikely. What should actually be clear is that House Hightower has Valyrian features, at least in the current timeline, and quite possibly going back to the ancient times, preceding House Targaryen's arrival. Most fan art of House Hightower, the most famous member being Alicent, tends to show her with brown hair. However, it would have been extremely unlikely to produce 4 Targaryen children with silver hair and purple eyes. That being Aegon, Helena, Aemond, and Daeron. One of Aegon the Conqueror's children, Maegor, was married to a Hightower, and though no heirs were produced, it is quite likely that this family, which has prized itself on keeping its genetic heritage pure, would so easily marry into a family like the Hightowers unless they already shown a degree of Valyrian-esque heritage, having silver hair and purple eyes already. But even if I'm wrong, and even if this wasn't the case, one of Daemon and Laena's daughters, the Princess Rhaena Targaryen, married a Garmund Hightower, younger brother of a Lord Lionel Hightower, by whom she had 6 daughters. This allows for an infusion of Valyrian genetics into the Hightower bloodline if it wasn't there before, or something similar. Thus, with some careful management, House Hightower could maintain silver hair in their bloodline. And from this, it is not hard to imagine that Sir Gerald Hightower would have had silver hair. Now, when it comes to relating Tormund Giantsbane to House Hightower, there are no direct hints. There are some strange connections. The name Tormund doesn't repeat itself, but the name Ormond comes up at least a couple of times in Westeros history. The most recent is Ormond Baratheon, who was the grandfather of Robert Stannis Renly, who married a Targaryen, Rhaelle to be precise. But the other Ormond that matters is an Ormond Hightower, who was Otto Hightower's nephew during the Dance of the Dragons. He participated in the war leading the Hightower armies, and was eventually killed by a Dustin, known as Roderick the Ruin, in a last suicidal charge of the Winter Wolves. In Tormund Giantsbane's case, there is no direct anagram, or even partial anagram, between this new name and his previous one of Gerald Hightower, and if you take all of Tormund's many, many titles, it would be almost effortless to get Gerald Hightower out of that. Thus there's no conclusive proof there. However, in the case of Tormund, and we'll talk about Corran Halfhand later, it may be that these two chose a name based on an ancestor, storied and important. Ormond Hightower, while killed during the Dance of the Dragons, was the patriarch of the family, and perhaps in Hightower terms, the mastermind, or at least the beneficiary of the mastermind who organised the fall of the Targaryen dragons. If not as directly as Otto and Alicent, still played a major role. He wielded a Valyrian steel sword named Vigilance, a warrior and a general, and it could be that he was one of Gerald Hightower's heroes growing up. One other possible connection is that ostensive bear which Tormund. There has been a suggestion that this she-bear in question was in fact Mage Mormont, whose house sigil of the Mormonts is in fact a bear. And Tormund, being a notable raider, may have snuck over the wall and wooed in a strange manner this northern lady, warrior woman. You have to also note that this isn't the first time which the Hightowers, one of the oldest and most prestigious and richest houses in Westeros, has a relationship with the Mormonts, one of the most northerly houses. It's also one of the poorest. Yeah, I mean Lyness Hightower and Jorah Mormont. So this relationship between these two star-crossed houses seems to repeat itself, and fathered maybe one or more of her daughters. This is, of course, pure speculation. But on the topic of Tormund's children, most of them appear to be rather young, teenagers or early 20s at most, and some of them are much younger. This just suggests, despite his advanced age, he fathered children late, which might not be, as we should say, inconsistent with a possible Gerald Hightower's exile north of the Wall. He came late, out of his vows, or if he didn't entirely abandon his vows, he broke them in fathering children, and the opportunity came late in life, and that might explain why, despite his age, he fathered younger children. Still speculation. When it comes to playing the role of a wildling, his mummer's farce, if it was indeed the case, Tormund is far more committed to the role than, say, Arthur Dayne would be as Mance Rayder. His mannerisms are better to the point, though occasionally we see the mask maybe slip, such as when Rattleshirt, or the Lord of Bones, comes for Jon under Mance's orders. Tormund, like a good little Kingsguard, puts himself between this kingly candidate and this one come to seize him, speaking perhaps very knightly mannerisms as he does. Again, nothing concrete. Though perhaps there's the pièce de résistance, comes with his constant reference to his long member, his massive phallus, his magnificent membrum virile. This might seem like nothing important, though in the closing epilogue of A Dance with Dragons, in Kevan Lannister's chapter, when speaking to Cersei after her release from the Faith of the Seven, they discuss that Mace Tyrell planned, as Hand of the King, to erect a new tower in the place of the one she burnt down, planning to make it twice as tall as it was before, and Cersei makes the coy implication that by conflating tall towers and long lances also being another euphemism for a big penis, that Mace Tyrell was trying to tell him something. And in fact, if Tormund, constantly boasting about the length of his palace, could imply his heritage from the tallest tower in the land, the High Tower. All of this is, of course, a stretch. Gerald Hightower is a bit of a strange Kingsguard. He's the Lord Commander, of course. Came to power, or his position rather, after the burning of Summerhole. Considering he was probably present at the event, I speculate, since House Hightower is intent on destroying the dragons and bringing the downfall of House Targaryen in order to restore their prominence in the Seven Kingdoms, which they had before the conquest, that Gerald Hightower was likely responsible for the tragedy at Summerhole. And I've also speculated that he may have poisoned Lyanna. He certainly may have helped provoke the confrontation between the two Kingsguard loyal to Rhaegar and Eddard and company. However, the white cloak he wears and the encirclement I've speculated upon it, he also is caught between this desire to serve his family and the need to serve the king, whoever that was be. Maybe it was Aerys at one point, but then perhaps Jon later on. This would create a weird circumstance for this very probable double agent, and like an Asimovian robot, when faced with these conflicting orders and conflicting vows, instead goes a little bonkers and becomes a wildling. Wouldn't be the strangest thing to happen in the story, but nothing to confirm it.
The main point of failure of the Tormund is Gerald Hightower theory is that his children, especially his sons, seem a bit too old to have all been sired in the 15 to 17 years in which Gerald would have had after the Tower of Joy. His youngest son, Dormund, is reported to have a deep voice, meaning he has passed puberty. In part, this could be because the harsh wildling lifestyle means children grow up faster compared to children south of the Wall. And to have 5 children all past puberty in 15 years is unlikely, especially not from a single mother, though Tormund has stated that several women have given him children. That being said, it is a very tight timeline, and a couple of those sons could in fact be older than that.
Lastly is Sir Oswell Went, taking on a new identity as Cohen Halfhand. Of this I see the least evidence, and initially I had no proof or even supporting speculation to confirm this at all. Given a little thought, there may be one small slither of hope for this theory, this conjecture rather. We know nothing of Oswell Went, besides the fact that he has black humour and tended to adorn his white helmet in the Kingsguard with that of a bat. We don't know what he looks like, nor do we know what any member of House Went looks like. However, the closest relatives are, of course, Catelyn, Edmure, and Lysa Tully, who have their auburn hair and their blue eyes. These features, however, seem to come from their Tully side, since Brynden, the Blackfish, also has auburn hair and blue eyes, their uncle paternal, and their Went side could be any sort of thing. Very probably the Went side is also auburn hair and blue eyes, but it could also be something else. Cohen Halfhand, in comparison, is old, his hair going grey, but his eyes are also grey, kind of like the Starks. House Went inherited the seat of Harrenhal after the downfall of House Lothston. They were a knightly house in service to House Lothston, whose most famous member had red hair, not so dissimilar from Catelyn. The seat of Harrenhal was erected by House Hoare, specifically by Harren the Black, their chief member who terrorized and pillaged the Riverlands before Aegon's conquest. They had a tyrannical legacy, and House Hoare originally came from the Iron Islands. House Hoare had mixed Andal blood and followed the faith of the Seven, which made them somewhat of pariahs, though powerful rulers amongst the Iron Islanders before they were cast down by Aegon the Conqueror. I bring this up for 2 reasons. One, since they were in control of the Riverlands, they had ample opportunity to spread their genetic material amongst the local population. This creates the possibility that many of their descendants ended up amongst the noble houses of the Riverlands. The other reason I bring this up is that Cohen Volmar, the supposedly last descendant of Harren the Black, to rule the Iron Islands before he was slain in single combat with Aegon the Conqueror. Now, the reason I bring this up is that Cohen Halfhand, though we don't know of his lineage, Oswell Went may be hearkening back to some storied ancestor in which he may have claimed some twisted descent from. In my Ashara Dane video series, I speculated that House Dane chose to help Rhaegar not just out of friendship between Arthur and Rhaegar, but also a desire to reclaim lost prestige for House Dane and supremacy of Dorne, which they might have been able to gain when Rhaegar became king. He would be able to dote upon them. Oswell Went and House Went may have also wished to increase their supremacy in the Riverlands, gaining power back over House Tully, and reclaim an old legacy of House Hoare that they may have been descended from. This is hard to countenance as true. However, there's one small tidbit of information which may grant it some more credence. That is, Arya and her coloration. Arya has dark hair and grey eyes, which is distinct from her other true-born siblings. who take after more of their mother, with the auburn hair and the deep blue eyes. Whilst her Stark heritage might suggest she would end up with dark grey hair or brown hair and grey eyes like Eddard has, the fact that her siblings are consistently auburn hair and blue eyes suggests to me that it is unlikely that pure Stark heritage and pure Tully heritage would produce anything other than auburn hair and blue-eyed children. This is unless that from her Went heritage, Catelyn gives Arya the brown hair and the grey eyes as more recessive than the auburn and the blue, and it's from this side which she gets her appearance and just only coincidentally ends up looking like Eddard. If true, it may be that Arya inherits some protection in Harrenhal from the curse of Harren the Black, because she shares some descent from the House Whore by some indirect means, however long and circuitous. And as a result, Cohen Halfhand, with his appearance of grey eyes, could well be Oswell Went. Now, I should address the tale of Beowulf the Bard. There is foreshadowing in the tale as told by Ygritte, wherein as Beowulf could not slay his own son and was slain in turn, Cohen later takes a dive and lets Jon kill him in a duel. The song ends when they find the babe, but there is a darker end to this story. 30 years later, when Beowulf was king beyond the wall and led the free folk south, it was young Lord Stark who met him at the frozen ford. Take note, young means 29 to 30 years old in this case. And killed him, for Beowulf would not harm his own son when they met sword to sword. Jon 6, A Clash of Kings. This may seem like foreshadowing exclusively for Jon, but taking the song in its entirety shows it's not exclusive to Lord Snow. No, they had been in Winterfell all the time, hiding with the dead beneath the castle in Jon 6, which foreshadows, "We never went," said Bran. Well, only to the edge, and then doubled back. I sent the wolves on to make a trail, but we hid in father's tomb. Bran 7, A Clash of Kings. And going on, "Aye," she said, "but the gods hate kinslayers, even when they kill unknowingly." When Lord Stark returned from this battle, and his mother saw Beowulf's head upon his spear, she threw herself from a tower in her grief. Her son did not long outlive her. One o' his lords peeled the skin off him, and wore him for a cloak. The mother who threw herself from the tower, in grief, lines up with Edric's tale of Lady Ashara in Arya's chapters in A Storm of Swords, and Arya's chapters in A Feast for Crows when a Night's Watch deserter, Daeron, sings of a stupid lady who throws herself from a stupid tower because her stupid prince was killed. Whereas the daughter stolen from Lord Stark, and whom bore Bael a son for love, is speaking of Lyanna, the same woman in the song, but different women in the story. The Lord Stark who commits kinslaying and then is flayed by a Bolton is Robb, who slew his distant kin, Wicked Karstark, for being killed by Roose, or an understudy at the Red Wedding. But the Lord Stark could also be Eddard. Recall Eddard married Catelyn, whose mother was a Went. In a symbolic sense, slaying Sir Oswell might be kinslaying. Consider Ashara's suicide, assuming that it wasn't murder, like so many other falls from a tower are. Sir Arthur and Eddard are the red herrings that the gullible point of view characters get given. Prince Rhaegar, a fancy of many a maiden, died months before. Stale news, too old to provoke such a reaction. Recall Ashara danced with a white sword at Harrenhal. Of the 6 in attendance, we know not which one. Sir Oswell is a long-term ally of Rhaegar, likely living on Dragonstone with the prince, his wife, and his wife's lady-in-waiting. Sir Oswell has dark humour, and the dark-haired Ashara is known to laugh. Food for thought. To conclude,
What value does a surviving Kingsguard add to the story? Howland Reed, the only confirmed survivor of the Tower of Joy, wasn't in the room when Lyanna died. Unless Eddard shared the details later. The motivations and experiences of Rhaegar and companions died with Lyanna, and Howland has precious little credibility with the nobility of Westeros to impress the value of Jon's parentage, such as it is. One of the surviving Kingsguard would provide all these things far better than the all-seeing eyes of Bloodraven or some retconned High Septon. In 50 AC, 2 members of Maegor's former Kingsguard, Sir Oliver Bracken and Sir Raymond Mallory, made common cause with former Faith militant members to seize control of Night's Watch castles and form their own little kingdoms. Sir Oliver and Sir Raymond also were the 2 Kingsguard to abandon Maegor for Jaehaerys, his nephew. As Sir Arthur and Sir Oswell chose Rhaegar over his father, in spite of their oaths, thus are more devious than their reputations suggest. As for the individuals themselves, we know next to nothing of Sir Oswell, not his age, appearance, or demeanour, save his dark humour. We can guess more of Sir Gerald, and some faint resemblance of the man may be seen in Tormund, though 1 or 2 of his sons might be too old to fit the timeline. Mance, however, has enough contradictions in his character to warrant further scrutiny. His mannerisms have more in common with that of the Westerosi nobility than that of common-born Night's Watch Rangers or wildlings. Tormund and Corran are both on board with him being a wildling child taken by the Watch. But the story we get from Sleece of House Florent, Mance being sired by a ranger and a common-born woman, is the same as Craster. Perhaps Val is purposely confusing Queen Florent, due to the sons of Mance and Craster being swapped. Andosha, a wildling woman, is sure Mance is just an old crow who flew down from the Shadow Tower one day, who doesn't know true winter like the free folk, and the free folk remember. Whilst there is the tantalizing possibility that he is Sir Arthur, I mean, no evidence truly proves or debunks this hypothesis. Mance Rayder is a pun name, with the same number of letters as Arthur Dane. Even if he is not some secret Kingsguard, there is something very suspicious about his persona. A crow is a tricky bird, and all crows are liars. He has lied about the Horn of Jormund, at least according to Tormund. Mance is not what he seems. This is all I have on the topic, and I will wash my hands of this silliness. Next time, the Targaryen lineage.